Sometimes love doesn't walk into your life, it crashes into you at full speed in the middle of a wedding. Welcome back to Lesson Lit, the place where we bring you emotional, romantic stories that make your heart race, your eyes tear up, and your soul believe in love again. Today's video is titled, Billionaire Falls in Love at First Sight with the Bridesmaid Who Was Late to His Friend's Wedding. So grab a drink, settle in, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The chandelier light spilled across the marble floor like liquid gold, reflecting in polished tiles that were far too slippery for the heels Emily Carter had so confidently chosen that morning. She was late, hopelessly, unforgivably late, and each frantic step down the long hotel corridor sent her heart racing faster. In one hand she clutched a bouquet of blush roses, the other struggled to keep her pale satin dress from tangling around her knees. Sorry, so sorry, she mumbled as she narrowly avoided colliding with a waiter balancing a tray of champagne flutes. The stems clinked dangerously, but by some miracle, didn't fall. Emily exhaled in relief and charged forward again, praying to make it before her best friend walked down the aisle. She could already hear the muffled rise of violins and the murmur of guests inside the ballroom. And then, impact. It wasn't the wall she crashed into. It was something solid, someone. The collision sent her bouquet flying in a slow-motion spray of petals. Her purse slipped from her hand and her balance tipped forward. She braced herself for the humiliation of kissing the expensive carpet when a pair of strong hands caught her at the waist, steadying her before gravity could finish its work. The world stilled, a clean, understated cologne wrapped around her, sharp and warm at once, and for a dizzy second she forgot her own name. "Please tell me I didn't just take down an elderly man," she muttered, cheeks flaming as she steadied herself. A deep, controlled voice answered, smooth as velvet and maddeningly calm. "I'm definitely not an elderly man." Emily looked up. Bad idea. Dark hair perfectly in place, a tailored tuxedo that fit as if it had been cut from shadow, eyes the kind of blue that noticed everything. He watched her as though she were a puzzle, his mouth tilting into a smirk that felt like it could unravel her with a single twitch. "You're late," he said, not accusing, just observing. "Thank you, Captain Obvious," she shot back, dusting invisible lint from her dress and trying to ignore the warmth where his hand had steadied her. She attempted to step away, only to find her heel caught in the fabric of her gown. Perfect. Not only had she body-checked a stranger, she was now tethered to him like some tragic comedy sketch. Without hesitation, he crouched and freed the fabric with a precise tug, as though loosening a knot in a contract. "There," he said, straightening. "You may now continue your suicide mission. Though at this pace, you won't make it past the buffet." Her mouth fell open at his nerve. "Do you always narrate accidents?" "Only the interesting ones," he replied, and for the first time she noticed the faintest trace of laughter in his eyes. She grabbed her things, muttered something that might have been gratitude, and fled into the ballroom. The ceremony was already underway. Chandeliers shimmered overhead, casting everyone in soft light. Emily slipped into her place beside the other bridesmaids, bracing for the glare she knew was coming. Sure enough, Clara, radiant in lace, shot her a look sharp enough to slice marble. Emily mouthed a sheepish sorry, but her attention snagged elsewhere. Across the aisle, among the groomsmen, sat the man from the hallway. Brian Fischer. Someone whispered his name like a warning, then added, "He's one of the richest men in the country, CEO, cold, untouchable, never lets anyone close." Emily's breath caught. Of course. The universe couldn't just let her trip over any guest. She looked up and found him already watching her, gaze unreadable, yet piercing. He didn't look away. By the time the reception swelled with golden lights and soft music, Emily's resolve had cracked. She reached for a glass of wine, turned too fast, and disaster struck again. The crimson liquid cascaded down the front of Brian Fischer's immaculate suit. Her gasp caught in her throat. He glanced down, then up, calm as ever. "Tell me this didn't just happen," she whispered. "It did," he said, sliding off his jacket, rolling up his sleeves with deliberate ease. "Relax, it's only wine." His eyes glinted, a secret she wasn't meant to see, then softer. "But if you'd like to make it up to me, join me at the bar." Emily should have run. Instead, she heard herself say, "Fine, but I'm choosing the drinks." 2 glasses of whiskey landed between them. He raised an eyebrow, surprised but amused. "Impressive. I thought you'd order something with an umbrella." She smiled, deflecting the electricity between them with humor. "Maybe I just like proving people wrong." For the briefest instant, his laughter, low, genuine, unguarded, washed over her like warmth. She didn't realize she'd been staring until the music shifted, pull. In couples to the dance floor, she slid from the bar stool. I should get back to the bride. He rose too, closing the space between them. Dance with me. Her heart jumped. What if I say no? His smirk deepened. Then you're lying. She should refuse. She knew that. She should step back into the safety of duty and distance. Instead, she took his hand. The ballroom fell away as he guided her onto the floor. His palm settled against her back as though it had always belonged there, his eyes locked on hers, daring her to keep looking. She told herself it meant nothing. He told himself it was only curiosity. But when the music swelled and his touch lingered a heartbeat too long, both of them knew the truth. And when the song ended, she pulled away, breathless, trying to escape. Yet as she turned to leave, his hand brushed her back once more, a silent claim. Emily's pulse stumbled. She told herself to walk faster, to forget him. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The morning after the wedding, Emily Carter swore she would never think about him again. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, clutching her toothbrush like a weapon, glaring at her own reflection. It was just one night, one dance, a fluke. She repeated the words over and over, as though saying them aloud could scrub away the memory of Brian Fischer's hand at her waist, the way his laugh had curled through her chest like smoke. But the truth was impossible to ignore. She had dreamed of his eyes all night, of the way they had pinned her in place. She had woken up still hearing his voice. You're lying. By the time she walked into the offices of Horizon Construction, she had built her armor back up. Coffee in one hand, blueprints in the other, she told herself this was her world, her battlefield. Work was safe. Work was hers. Work was the one place no man, especially not a billionaire with a smirk that disarmed her, could reach her. The glass doors slid open, the hum of conversation buzzed through the sleek lobby, and she exhaled. Normal, professional, focus. She adjusted her blazer, smoothed her skirt, and walked into the conference room ready to bury herself in the Richmond Tower project. And then she froze. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Brian Fischer, perfectly pressed suit, cufflinks that caught the morning sun, fingers steepled over the very documents she had stayed up half the night refining. He didn't look at her right away, but the moment he did, the air shifted. Her coffee cup nearly slipped from her hand. Miss Carter, he said evenly, as though she were any other employee, not the woman who had been in his arms less than 12 hours ago. She forced her lips into something resembling a professional smile. Mr. Fischer. Her boss, Oliver Harris, cleared his throat, oblivious to the silent storm whipping between them. Emily, I don't believe you've officially met our new lead investor. Brian's firm has acquired a significant stake in Richmond Tower. He'll be working closely with us moving forward. Emily's stomach twisted. Lead investor? On my project? The universe wasn't just playing games anymore, it was laughing in her face. Throughout the meeting, Brian didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. Every time Emily presented a design solution, he countered with questions that sliced to the bone. Not cruel, but probing, as if he wanted to test how far he could push her. The rest of the team scribbled notes and exchanged uneasy glances. Emily K.A. kept her chin high, her voice steady, though her heart pounded like a drum. When the meeting finally ended, she packed her papers with trembling hands. She could feel his eyes on her again, burning through the polished veneer she'd so carefully reapplied. She turned quickly, determined to escape before he cornered her. Emily. The single word froze her mid-step. She closed her eyes for half a second before turning. He stood by the window, calm and unreadable, arms crossed. No friendly goodbye? She folded her arms tightly across her chest. Are you my boss now, Mr. Fischer? Not exactly, he said, tilting his head in that infuriating way. But we're partners on this project, which means we'll be seeing a lot of each other. That's convenient, she said, her tone clipped. His lips curved again, a ghost of that smirk. I'd call it interesting. Emily's heart gave another unhelpful lurch. You really think this is a game, don't you? I think, he said, stepping closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear, that you intrigue me. And I don't walk away from things that intrigue me. Her breath caught. She wanted to remind him of professional boundaries, of Clara, of every reason this could never work. But her pulse betrayed her. Her cheeks warmed again. He noticed. Of course he noticed. I should get back to my desk, she said, clutching her folder like a shield. He didn't move to stop her, only tilted his head again, eyes searching hers. Go then, but don't pretend you felt nothing last night. The words hung in the air, heavy as the silence after a slammed door. Emily turned, heels clicking against marble, heart caught between panic and something much more dangerous. She told herself she wouldn't look back. But halfway down the hall, curiosity betrayed her. She glanced over her shoulder. Brian Fischer was still watching, that unreadable smile tugging at his lips, like a man who had already made his move and was waiting for her to realize it. Emily's pulse quickened. She picked up her pace, but the thought echoed louder with every step. Maybe she wasn't running from him at all. Maybe, without even knowing it, she was running straight toward him. Emily told herself she could handle this. She'd survived impossible deadlines, hostile clients, and a family that never believed architecture was a real career. Surely she could survive one overbearing CEO with eyes like a storm. For the next week, she tried. She buried herself in floor plans, structural calculations, and endless client calls. She forced her voice into a steady, professional cadence whenever Brian Fischer entered the conference room. She kept her answers clipped, her gaze fixed on the table, as though eye contact itself were a contract she couldn't afford to sign. But if she thought ignoring him would make him stop, she underestimated him. Brian didn't chase in the usual way. No flowers sent to her desk, no careless texts begging for attention. He didn't have to. He lingered instead. He would appear at the coffee machine just as she reached for the sugar. He would ask a perfectly reasonable question about load-bearing beams, his tone flat, his eyes anything but. Every word he spoke seemed designed to test her composure. One afternoon, she caught herself twirling a pencil between her fingers, rehearsing arguments in her head before a design presentation. When she looked up, Brian was leaning back in his chair at the end of the table, watching her with the faintest smile, as if he already knew what she was about to say. Her pulse skipped. She forced herself to scowl, to remind him and herself that this was work, not pure, whatever last night had been. But even as she pushed him away with sharp words and pointed glares, she felt the truth crackling under her skin. He unsettled her because he saw her. Not just the polished version she presented to the board, not the late bridesmaid fumbling with her dress. He looked as though he could read the parts of her she tried to keep hidden. And then the sabotage began. It started small, a miscalculation in the load tables that could have slipped by unnoticed. Emily caught it, of course, she always did, but the error was too deliberate, too precise to be an accident. Days later, a delivery of steel beams arrived 3 inches too short, paperwork mysteriously altered. She worked late into the night, rerunning calculations, triple-checking orders, certain someone wanted the Richmond Tower project to fail. Her phone buzzed at midnight, a message from Brian. "Come to the balcony, we need to talk." She almost didn't go, almost stayed buried in blueprints, but something stronger than fear pulled her to the glass doors, out into the night air. The city stretched below them, restless and glittering. Brian was already there, sleeves rolled up, jaw tight. "You're avoiding me," he said without turning. His voice was low, steady, but she could hear the steel beneath it. "I'm working," she replied, folding her arms. "Some of us don't have the luxury of walking away from a project whenever we feel like it." At that, he turned, his eyes locked onto hers, and for once, she saw conflict there. Tension, yes, but also something raw, something almost vulnerable. "I already recused myself," he said. "Wait, the board knows. I signed everything this morning. Richmond Tower is no longer my decision." I stepped back. Her stomach twisted. "You what?" "I told you," Brian said, voice steady. "I don't walk away from what interests me, but I won't let you hide behind rules. I'm not your boss anymore. There's nothing stopping you now." Emily's breath caught. Every excuse she'd clung to, every shield she'd used, collapsed in a single sentence. Her chest ached with something fierce, something terrifying. "This is insane," she whispered. "You can't just throw away millions because of you," he interrupted, stepping closer, close enough that the city's glow caught the edge of his jaw. "Because one look at you, one night of listening to you fight for your ideas, and I realized I would rather lose money than lose the chance to know what it feels like to be chosen by you." Her fingers tightened on the balcony railing. The memory of the reckless car brushing past her outside the hotel flared in her mind. The flash of a license plate she never quite caught. A shiver slid down her spine, colder than the night air. Something about it didn't feel random anymore. Brian must have seen the shift in her eyes. He stepped even closer, his voice a whisper now. "You're pulling away because you're scared. But Emily, tell me you felt nothing when we danced. Look me in the eye and tell me." She opened her mouth. The lie trembled on her tongue, but the truth burned hotter. She couldn't force the words out. The city roared below. His gaze held hers, daring her to answer. And in that suspended moment, somewhere down on the street, a black car rolled past slowly, headlights flashing across the balcony like a warning. Emily's breath hitched. Her heart knew before her mind did. The night of the wedding had never been an accident. Someone wanted Brian Fischer out of the picture. And now she realized with a shudder, Being near him meant she was in the line of fire too. The rain had come without warning. Sheets of water slashed against the windows of Horizon's office, smearing the city lights into blurred streaks. Emily sat at her desk long past sunset, the glow of her monitor washing her face in cold blue. Her hands moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision, correcting the structural drawings that had been mysteriously corrupted earlier in the day. She should have been home hours ago. She should have been asleep. But every time she closed her laptop, her mind went back to him, the man who was everywhere and nowhere, always watching, always waiting. Brian Fischer, her investor, her temptation, her undoing. And now, perhaps, the only man who believed her, because someone wanted Richmond Tower to fall. The miscalculated beams, the swapped permits, the rumors dripping like poison into the press. Emily knew sabotage when she saw it. An architect's life was built on details, and these mistakes were too precise to be random. She had confronted Oliver, but he only frowned, muttered about clerical errors, and suggested she get some rest. Easy advice for a man who wasn't being watched by strangers in black cars. She rubbed her temple, thinking of the night she nearly died in the hotel driveway. That car hadn't just been reckless. The headlights, the sudden acceleration, it was aimed. At Brian, at her, she shivered. The office was almost silent when she finally rose, gathering her notes. She thought she was alone until a shadow detached itself from the window. Brian. He stood with his jacket off, white shirt sleeves rolled high, his expression unreadable in the half-light. The storm outside lit him in flashes, each strike of lightning sketching him in sharp relief. "You're still here," he said quietly. "I had work to fix," she replied, clutching her folder like a shield. "You shouldn't be here this late. Neither should you." She turned toward the door, desperate for air, for space, for distance. But then his voice stopped her mid-stride. "Emily." The way he said her name was a lock clicking shut. She turned slowly, meeting those eyes she had sworn not to meet again. No friendlier greeting. His tone was mild, but the tension coiled beneath it. "Are you testing me in meetings now?" she demanded. "Is this a game to you? Picking apart every idea I present just to see if I'll break?" He tilted his head, studying her like a chess piece. "And if I am?" Her pulse surged. "Then you're wasting your time. Because I won't be your entertainment, Brian." He moved closer, each step unhurried but deliberate, until the storm outside seemed to echo the rhythm of his shoes. "You're not entertainment," he said. "You're the only person who's made me forget myself in years. That terrifies me." Emily's voice shook. "You don't even do relationships. You said it yourself, you don't get involved." For a long moment he said nothing. His jaw tightened, his hand flexed against his side. Then he spoke, low, certain, like a man who had rehearsed these words in silence for too long. "I'm not your investor anymore. I transferred my shares this morning. There's no conflict, no rules left to hide behind. And the truth is, Emily..." He exhaled, stepping closer until the stormlight carved blue fire across his cheekbones. "I was wrong. I am involved. I've been involved since the second you crashed into me." Her throat constricted. Every excuse she had built Crystal umbled. No more professional boundaries, no more lines to point to and say this is why not. She had nothing left except the fear clawing at her ribs and the unbearable pull toward him. "You gave up millions," she whispered. "For me? I've lost bigger numbers," he said softly, "but I've never risked my heart. You're the first person who makes me want to." Her fingers tightened around the railing, knuckles pale. She wanted to run, to breathe, to hide. But when she looked into his eyes, no smirk now, no calculation, just raw honesty, her defenses trembled. The thunder cracked overhead. In the flash of lightning she saw it, the reflection of headlights sweeping across the glass, pausing as if someone waited below. The same sensation gripped her chest as on the wedding night. It hadn't been an accident. Brian followed her gaze, and his jaw hardened. "They were after me," he said, as if confirming her worst suspicion. "That driver wasn't careless. He worked for someone I exposed years ago. They tried to send a message." He paused. "But you were the one who almost paid for it." Emily's breath caught. "So, I was just collateral?" "No." He stepped closer, his voice vibrating with fury and something gentler. "You were the only thing that made me hesitate. The only reason I didn't fight back harder that night was because I couldn't risk putting you in danger. Don't you see? You're already inside my defenses." Her heart pounded, the rain hammered down. For the first time since they met, Brian Fischer looked less like an untouchable CEO and more like a man terrified of losing the one thing he hadn't planned for. Emily swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "And what if I can't handle your world?" He reached up, cupping her face with steady hands. "Then let me handle it with you. But don't lie to me, Emily. Don't tell me you felt nothing. Because I did. From the very first moment." "Not." She opened her mouth, searching for denial, but her voice broke on the truth she couldn't suppress. Down below, a car engine roared to life again, lingering like a predator. The storm swallowed the sound, but the message was clear. Their love wasn't the only dangerous game being played tonight. And as Brian's eyes stayed locked on hers, Emily realized with a shiver that this was no longer just about heartbeats and stolen glances. Someone out there wanted to end this story before it even began. Emily had always believed buildings told stories. Steel beams whispered of resilience, glass panels reflected ambition, and concrete foundations carried the weight of countless dreams. But now, as she sat at the long conference table with the Richmond Tower blueprints spread before her, she wondered if those very foundations could be shaken from the inside out, not by earthquakes, not by storms, but by betrayal. She had spent the past 2 days piecing together the sabotage. The miscalculated numbers weren't just typos, they were deliberate errors meant to fail inspection. The altered steel order wasn't a supplier's mistake, it had someone's fingerprints all over it. And the whispers in the press, the anonymous leaks about improprieties between her and Brian. Someone was orchestrating this, pulling strings to make both of them look incompetent, even corrupt. Brian had kept his word. He was no longer on the project. Oliver confirmed it in the morning meeting, his tone clipped but professional. "Mr. Fischer has transferred his voting rights to a third party. He'll remain a financial backer, but not in a managerial role." Emily had expected relief. Instead, the announcement felt like a guillotine blade held just above her neck. The board members eyed her, some with skepticism, some with pity. For the first time since she'd joined Horizon, she wasn't sure if her work would be judged on its merits or through the lens of scandal. Brian stayed silent during the meeting, arms folded, jaw set. He wasn't her shield anymore. He had made sure of that. And yet, when one of the senior partners tried to corner her afterward, pressing about the so-called investor relationship, Brian's presence at the edge of the room was a silent wall of steel. He didn't interfere. He didn't need to. Just being there was enough to steady her spine. That night, though, steady wasn't enough. They had promised Clara they'd attend the post-wedding dinner together, a quiet celebration on the rooftop terrace of a restaurant overlooking the skyline. Emily almost canceled, the weight of the day dragging her down, but Brian had already arranged everything, and some stubborn part of her refused to give whoever was sabotaging them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. The terrace was strung with warm fairy lights that shimmered against the glass of the city. A soft wind toyed with Emily's curls, carrying the faint salt of the bay. Brian was waiting at the far end of the table, a single velvet box resting by his hand. He didn't hide it, didn't tuck it away. He let it sit there between them like a question that had no polite answer. "You look like you've been fighting the world all day," he said softly, studying her face. "Maybe I have," she murmured, lowering herself into the chair. "Did you win?" She let out a hollow laugh. "I'm still standing, aren't I? That has to count for something." Dinner was unlike anything she expected. No ostentatious champagne, no five-star arrogance. Just quiet conversation, laughter that came easier than it should, and a man who, for once, looked like he was letting someone see beneath the armor. But the peace shattered on the drive back. They had barely pulled out of the parking garage when the world erupted in headlights. A black sedan surged from nowhere, cutting across their lane, its engine snarling. Brian swerved hard, tires screeching against wet asphalt. Emily's scream was swallowed by the storm. The car clipped their bumper before vanishing into the night like a shadow that had grown impatient. Brian pulled over, chest heaving, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "That wasn't random," he muttered. His voice was low, dangerous. "That was deliberate." Emily's heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. "Brian, who are these people?" He turned toward her, rain dripping down his temple where he'd rolled the window to check the damage. For the first time since she met him, he looked shaken, vulnerable. "People who don't like me alive. And now they know you matter to me." The words hit her harder than the crash. "You matter to me. Not just intrigue, not just amusement, something real, something that could burn her if she let it." She wanted to deny it, to retreat into her fortress of rules and deadlines, but the look in his eyes, raw, unguarded, tore through her defenses. He wasn't playing a game anymore. Emily swallowed hard. So what happens now? Brian leaned closer, voice barely above the hum of the rain. Now we stop running. From them. From each other. We build something that doesn't fall. Her pulse fluttered at the word build. Buildings, futures, love. Everything she'd been too afraid to want. She opened her mouth to respond, but her phone vibrated on the seat between them. The screen lit up with an unknown number. A message flashed across it in bold text. He ruined my life. Don't marry him, or you'll pay next. Emily's blood turned to ice. She looked at Brian. He had already seen it. His jaw tightened, his hand curling protectively around hers. The car sat idling on the rain-slick street, their reflections fractured in the windshield. The world had given them a choice. And in the back of Emily's mind, one truth throbbed with terrifying clarity. Love wasn't the only thing they had to build. They had to survive long enough to protect it. The morning of Clara's second celebration dawned like a promise. The storm had broken, leaving the sky washed clean, the city sparkling under a pale blue sun. From her window, Emily watched the Richmond Tower rise against the horizon, steel ribs and glass skin catching the light, the building she had poured her heart into. Today was supposed to be about love and beginnings, and yet beneath her lace veil, her chest ached with dread. Clara floated into the bridal suite, her gown trailing behind her like spilled champagne. You look like you've seen a ghost, she teased gently, adjusting Emily's veil with steady fingers. Nerves? Emily forced a smile, but the truth clung to her throat. She hadn't slept. The threatening message still burned in her phone, its words etched into her mind. Don't marry him, or you'll pay next. She hadn't told Clara she couldn't, not today. By evening, the ballroom glowed once more, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of expectation. Brian stood at the altar in another flawless suit, but for the first time since she met him, he looked unsettled. Not because of the wedding, Emily realized, but because of what he knew. He had seen the message too. As she began her walk down the aisle, everything blurred, the flowers, the guests, the chandeliers raining light. All she could see was Brian, standing tall and still, eyes fixed only on her. She clutched her bouquet tighter, her pulse echoing in her ears. When she reached him, he leaned close, his voice meant only for her. After this, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you from the start. Her stomach flipped. She nodded, her fingers trembling as she placed them in his. The officiant's words carried through the room, but Emily barely heard them. She was watching Brian's jaw clench, watching secrets weigh on his chest. Do you, Brian Fischer, take Emily Carter? I do, he said firmly, eyes never leaving hers. Her heart cracked open. He had never sounded so sure of anything. Do you, Emily Carter, take Brian Fischer? Yes, she breathed, her voice breaking but steady. Yes, forever. The room erupted in applause as Brian slid the ring onto her finger. He pulled her into a kiss, fierce and certain, sealing a vow that silenced every doubt. For one suspended moment, it felt like the whole world had melted away. And then the world reminded her it hadn't. The doors at the back of the ballroom banged open. A man staggered inside, soaked from the rain, clutching something in his hand. Security rushed forward, but his voice cut through the music, sharp and ragged. Brian Fischer! He shouted, eyes wild, locked on the groom. You think you can erase me? You think I'll let you take everything again? Gasps rippled through the guests. Emily's heart sank as she recognized him. The face she'd glimpsed in that blur of headlights at the hotel entrance. The same man whose name had been whispered in scandal years ago when Brian dismantled a fraudulent empire and walked away clean. The intruder threw a folder onto the floor, papers scattered across the aisle. She should know the truth, he spat. Tell her who you really are. Tell her when you first saw her. Emily's breath caught. She turned to Brian, searching his face. His jaw tightened, but this time he didn't look away. I did see you before the wedding, he said, voice raw. Years ago. You were a student, presenting your first design. I was on the judging panel under another name. You stood there with trembling hands and spoke about light as if it were alive. You don't remember me, Emily, but I remembered you. I've been following your work ever since. I've been helping quietly because I knew one day I'd regret it if I didn't. The room spun. The threatening messages, the sabotage, the near accident, it all snapped into focus. The man who had just stormed in wasn't after Emily. He was after Brian, the man who had once exposed him. And Emily, the woman Brian had secretly admired for years, had been caught in the crossfire of a war she didn't even know existed. Her bouquet slipped from her fingers, roses scattering across the aisle like the night of the collision. She looked into Brian's eyes, searching for lies. She didn't find them. She found fear, and something even more dangerous. Love. The gunmetal glint of a weapon appeared in the intruder's hand. Gasps turned to screams. Brian moved before Emily could, shielding her with his body. The officiant's voice faltered mid-sentence. The music died. Time slowed. Emily's heart pounded in her throat as the man raised the gun and hissed, "If I can't have justice, then neither can you." The shot rang out, and in that instant, between the shattering of glass and the echo of chaos, Emily realized love at first sight was never the end of the story. It was only the beginning of the storm.